When I tell people I can fly, they're always really impressed. But if I tell them I started flying because I was just too short to reach the cookies on the top shelf, they get slightly less impressed. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture, and here are 10 great supervillains with terrible origin stories. Number 10. Prometheus is just anti-Batman, really. Prometheus is one of the most underappreciated Batman villains of all time, and that's pretty impressive considering just about every Batman villain but the Joker is underappreciated given just how good they are. The one issue with this villain is that he's just a little obvious. A little obvious how? Well, obvious in the sense that he's clearly a character intended to mirror Batman, but does so in a way that's a bit on the nose. And no, this isn't just about his suit, even though that alone is a little suspiciously Dark Knight-esque. This is about the fact that his parents were criminals gunned down by the police, who drove the young man to want to dedicate his life to committing acts of injustice. This is a backstory that is literally just the opposite of Bruce Wayne's, and while it's interesting, it's also bordering on cliché, which is a shame for such an otherwise interesting villain. Given the Joker, Hush, Red Hood, and most of Gotham's gallery of rogues managed to be a dark mirror to Batman, you have to feel as though Prometheus could have done just the same, a little less blatantly. Number 9. Sin grows up fast. When your father is the evil Nazi supervillain Red Skull, the chances of you not at some point being evil are slim to none. This is doubly true when your dear old dad names you Cynthia, spelled to specifically include the word sin in it, just to make sure you know every time you look at your own name that you were born to do evil. Just to ensure Sin didn't even get a brief moment of normality in her childhood, she'd then be popped in an aging machine to make her a fully grown adult, because that's the kind of thing that couldn't possibly have any negative consequences whatsoever. I mean, to be fair, it's not as though we were exactly expecting a Nazi to be a good dad in the first place. She would go on to lead the Sisters of Sin, because, you know, look at the name, of course she did, before then being de-aged and reverting to being a regular supervillain, because nothing in life can ever be simple. Number 8. Milkman Man is a milkman. Milkman Man, by all means, deserved way more of a presence than he got in the world of comics, especially given how entirely 100% surreal the poor guy's beginnings are. You see, the reason the character is so dang weird is that he's the product of two people who shouldn't exist, Casey Brink and Terry Nunn from the Doom Patrol series, kissing. And as if this alone wasn't weird enough, the poor thing is then taken by a questionably named organisation named Retcon, the two ends making it subtle, and turned into a milk-drinking, Superman-copying weapon of mass destruction. And he's still cool as hell, just unfortunately the level of insanity his backstory reaches is such a degree that you could never ever tell anyone who's not into comics about him, or they'd think you were having a mental breakdown for enjoying reading about it. Number 7. Barbara Minerva becomes a cheetah god. While Cheetah is not the most creative supervillain name of all time, she's certainly a good villain. Scary, strong, and the kind of character you could dress as for Halloween without having to break the bank. And though her backstory is undeniably metal as hell, being turned into an ancient cheetah god through a ritual basically has to be, the original version of events has some unfortunate plotlines. Mainly the fact that initially Cheetah only turned into this form during the full moon, because the ritual needed a virgin to be properly completed, and Barbara Ann Minerva, as it turned out, had been getting down in her free time. Given this plot point was changed not too much later, with Cersei providing her a remedy for this that turned Barbara fully into cheetah form, it really didn't need to be included, as generally you have to imagine an ancient cheetah god doesn't care whether you've been boning down or not. In a smart decision, this particular little element would be retconned out of existence after Flashpoint, and we were all a little better for it. Number 6. Gorilla Grodd is a second-generation magic ape. If you've read much of classic comics, you may have picked up on one thing. Old school comics really love gorillas, maybe too much. This would explain why, instead of Grodd, or Grodd's son rather, merely being a gorilla who happened to become super smart one way or another, he instead is from a group of already advanced apes, given their powers by the goddamn Speed Force, which apparently these simians worship as a sort of god, having seen it supposedly wipe out the Mayans years before. That's right, not only are the apes aware of a part of history that we've been trying to work out for years, and are somehow connected to the Speed Force, but they also have managed to keep a city of hyper-intelligent apes hidden from us for so long, they have new generations come into adulthood. The funniest part of all of this is that his original backstory, that merely had the original Grodd become super intelligent and telepathic because of his exposure to a space rock, actually feels way less crazy than the revised version of events. Number 5. The Mad Mod just really loves fashion. So, the Mad Mod isn't the figure that most comic fans would likely know from the paper series themselves, but rather from a perhaps more unusual source, that of the Teen Titans cartoon that cropped up in the 2000s. This is wonderful because it popularised a character that is undeniably hilarious, an intensely British criminal whose main gimmick is that he is British, and fashionable. As you might imagine, his comic origin is about as detailed as that is, with Neil Richards' motivations being that he loved clothes and he loved crime, and thus his desperate wish to combine the two birthed his villainous alias, Mad Mod. Given how strangely engrossing Mod is, you'd be forgiven for hoping his origins are slightly more fleshed out than just him just loving evil so much. There's also something bizarrely endearing about the simplicity of it too. Number 4. Onslaught is a long story. On one hand, Onslaught has a badass design, serious skill set, and an interesting creation story. On the other, he's a psionic entity made when Professor X and Magneto melded minds, and he attempts to use Xavier's crush on Jean Grey to turn her evil. This is both the single dorkiest evil plot of all time to be pulled off by a creature that isn't even all technically real, and also took the one plotline we all desperately wanted to have been retconned. That is, for Xavier to be in love with a woman who he more or less raised from being a child, and who he is a father figure to, and showed it can still be canon, which sucked on several levels. Onslaught is as cool as hell as concepts go, but there must have been a better way for it to be pulled off than having Magneto and Xavier fuse Dragon Ball style and then for the resulting psychic energy baby to hang out Professor X's head for like 30 years. Number 3. DESAAD really hates cats. It's safe to say that anyone who interacted with Darkseid in their youth ends up messed up. He's just the kind of dude who simply corrupts everyone he so much as orders fast food from. That said, DESAAD's past, specifically his past with Darkseid, is surreal when you compare it to the likes of the infinitely suffering Mr. Miracle. Because DESAAD wasn't put through extreme circumstances, or tortured, or brainwashed, or any of the things that usually happen to those Darkseid keeps close to him. No, DESAAD had a bad experience with his pets. When DESAAD was young, Darkseid would pull a bizarre stunt on him that would convince the younger inhabitant of New Genesis that his pet cat had murdered his pet bird. This would be pretty traumatic for any kid, but not quite enough to turn them fully evil and convince them to torture innocent people, as was the result with DESAAD. Number 2. Cassandra Nova. Now, initially, Cassandra's story sounds fascinating, and pretty well written if you hear bits of it out of context. After all, the story of a twin we didn't know about because of unusual birth circumstances isn't unheard of in the world of story creation, especially if said sibling is none other than Professor X. However, Cassandra's full origin story is almost needlessly weird. Instead of just being a baby that Xavier ousted in the womb, thus giving her a fair reason to still be mad after all these years, Nova is a Momandrai, which is most easily described as a sort of evil spirit. As such, she uses Charles's great powers to give herself a human form, only for him to somehow sense she is evil, as a baby not even born yet, and zap her out of there. As a Momandrai, though, Cassandra doesn't die, instead spending years growing as a series of cells on a sewer wall until she can enact revenge. It's by no means the weirdest aspect of Xavier's life, but you have to question why they couldn't have made the plot so she was just another human with powers, especially because it would have made a much more complex case of grey morality than outright stating, nah, she's an evil entity. Number 1. Lex Luthor losing his hair. Perhaps the most infamous and hilarious case of bad, weird origin story for an absolutely sublime villain is that of a particularly unique classic backstory for Lex Luthor that saw him go evil because he went bald. Well, that might not be doing it fully justice. See, in this continuity, Luthor was a humble teen scientist, seemingly almost as proud of his scientific ability as he was of his coiffed locks of hair. So, when Superman, going by Superboy at the time, as he was also a teen, was saved by Lex from a kryptonite meteor, the spaceman naturally wanted to repay the favour. Unfortunately, while the gesture was lovely, crafting Luthor a custom lab, Superboy didn't think about the fact that leaving dangerous unknown chemicals with an unsupervised teenager might not be the best course of action. To be fair, things only went wrong when Lex knocked over a concoction he'd just made, starting a fire in his lab. When Superboy came to put out the fire, his breath would destroy one of Lex's other experiments and create a fume that would turn the scientist bald. Despite the fact that the Man of Steel saved him from burning to death in the accident, and that it was Lex's fault in the first place anyway, really, this would convince Luthor to hate Superman for the rest of eternity, proving that he is at least the pettiest villain of all time. That's it for our list today, guys. If you reckon I missed anything off this list, please drop it into the comments below. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And remember that you can catch us over on Twitter at WhatCulture. You can catch myself at Sean Ferrick on Twitter and Instagram as well. And if you're gonna go mad, at least try and have a better origin story than these guys. Thanks.